Fact. Other than the vice president, the president is the only federal official elected by the entirety of the people, by the entire nation. In addition to the institutional impossibility of war powers and decisions in the hands of a multi-member body like Congress, the president is the only official who was elected to, among other things, serve as commander-in-chief. Now, these bullet points, these factual points, make it very, very easy to follow what's taking place despite all the lies that are coming into your home through TV and podcasters and radio, despite all the lies that this is an unconstitutional war, despite all the lies that the president has to bow at the power of Congress before he can take action, despite people running around talking about the War Powers Act of 1973, which no president has accepted as constitutional, but they've insisted it's a violation of presidential powers under Article 2, and the Supreme Court has never ruled on it and never will. Now let's dig a little bit deeper, shall we? I think we shall. Let's look at Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. What did they say about war powers? What did they do exactly? Well, I'm going to read it to you as Madison wrote it. Mr. Pinckney opposed the vesting of this power in the legislature. Remember, the first draft said, Congress shall make war. Its proceedings were too slow, he said. Congress meets but once a year. At least then. That was a good time. The House of Representatives would be too numerous for such deliberations. The Senate, he said, would be the best depository, being more acquainted with foreign affairs and most capable of proper resolutions. Pinckney said if states are equally represented in the Senate, so as to give no advantage to large states, the power will notwithstanding be safe, as the small have their all at stake, I'm reading as it's written, in such cases, as well as the large states. It would be singular for one authority to make war and another peace. Delegate Butler, Mr. Butler. The objections. The legislature lie in great degree. The Senate, he was for vesting the power in the president, who will have all the requisite qualities and will not make war, but when the nation will support it. His point was the president was elected by all the people. He should be the commander-in-chief, not Congress with all these disparate individuals. And then, of course, as a practical matter, you have votes, right? And what if it's a really close vote? So some congressman from one state, one district in one state, or maybe a handful of them, a faction, a cabal, will determine whether we go to war or not. So they were very concerned about all this power being in Congress, and you can see how prescient they were. Look at what's going on today. Mr. Madison and Mr. Geary moved to insert declare, striking out make war. Declare war, not make war. And in Madison's notes themselves, declare is italicized and make is italicized to emphasize the point that they want to swap out make for declare. And I go on, Madison's notes, leaving to the executive the power to repel sudden attacks. Now, people will hang on the word sudden, but ladies and gentlemen, this was way back at the beginning of the Republic. There weren't nuclear weapons, there weren't missiles, there weren't tanks. In other words, modern warfare is fast, and it's not something that can be repelled necessarily right away. Mr. Sherman thought it stood very well. The executive should be able to repel, but not commence war. Make better than declare, the latter narrowing the power too much. So he's saying, look, it's okay for the power of the president to move suddenly, but I don't like this word declare. It waters down make too much. Mr. Gerry never expected to hear in a republic a motion to empower the executive alone to declare war. Mr. Ellsworth, there is a material difference between the cases of making war and making peace. It should be more easy to get out of war than into it. War also is a simple and overt declaration, peace attended with intricate and secret negotiations. Now, he raised that, which is interesting, but not terribly relevant to aspect of the debates of who makes war and who does not. Mr. Madison agreed to giving the power of war to the executive because not safely to be trusted with it or to the Senate because not so construed as to be entitled to it. He was for clogging rather than facilitating war, but for facilitating peace. He preferred declare to make. So Madison's of two minds on this. He says, look, I don't want a president who's too powerful, but on the other hand, this idea that Congress would make war is crazy, because we'll never win a war, or we'll never take action we need to take. And so they said, all right, let's take make out, put in declare, and then later, of course, under Article 2, they give the power of the president. Basically, it's plenary. In other words, all-consuming, to run foreign policy and national security and commander-in-chief. So that's the decision that's made. So how did the vote take place? New Hampshire voted no. Massachusetts abstained. Connecticut voted no. Pennsylvania voted aye. Delaware voted aye. Maryland voted aye. Let's see here. Virginia voted aye. North Carolina voted aye. South Carolina voted aye. Georgia voted aye. One of the states isn't there. One of the 13, it's because they weren't there. The delegates weren't always there. And so it is. Now let's go on. How is this explained? By the National Constitution Center. In its reporting containing the first full draft of the Constitution considered at the Constitutional Convention, the Committee of Detail included a provision granting to Congress the power to make war, quote unquote. The assignment of this power to Congress and the clause's phrasing, which differed from its counterpart in the Articles of Confederation, prompted debate among the delegates. Charles Pinckney of South Carolina made the first remarks about the clause, as you heard from my raw reading of it. He objected to including the House of Representatives in the power to make war because he believed it to be too large a body for the quick deliberations necessary for the task. The Senate alone would be better option, he said, because it would be more acquainted with foreign affairs and more capable of proper resolutions. Pinckney also argued that because both small and large states face existential risk from war, the composition of the Senate with its equal representation of states made it a more appropriate body. Pierce Butler of South Carolina voiced an objection to either chamber of Congress being assigned the power to make war. Butler advocated instead for, quote, vesting the power in the president, who will have all the requisite qualities and will not make war but when the nation will support it, as you see from the raw reading. After Butler's comments, James Madison of Virginia and Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts moved to change the clause to give Congress the power to declare war rather than make war. According to Madison's notes, the change was intended to leave to the executive the power to repel sudden attacks. Roger Sherman spoke in opposition to the motion, contending that substituting the term declare would narrow congressional authority too significantly. But it did narrow congressional authority, even though he disagreed with it. It narrowed it enormously. Sherman argued that the original term make better captured the formulation in which the president was empowered to repel attacks but could not commence war on his own. They rejected that. At this point, Elbridge Gerry objected to Butler's earlier raised proposition that the clause be shifted to a presidential power. That's right. So this is authority that rests in Article 1 under Congress. But then in Article 2, the president is the commander-in-chief. He's in charge of foreign policy and national security. So when you read those together, it's pretty clear that the president has this authority, and Congress only has the power of the purse. Gerry remarked that he never expected to hear in a republic a motion to empower the executive alone to declare war. And remember, that's a quote, the president's not declaring war. He's literally making war. And that war can be a defensive war in reaction to another power, an enemy, or it can be a preemptive war, as we see right now, because of threats from Iran. Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut spoke next and highlighted the distinction between making war and making peace. To Ellsworth, it should be more easy to get out of war than into it. George Mason then responded to the several lines of argument that had been raised in response to the motion to substitute declare for make. Mason maintained that the president could not be trusted with the power of war, and that the Senate was not so constructed as to entitle it. Mason endorsed the view that the Constitution should facilitate the process of making peace while making it more difficult to engage in war, and he concluded by stating that he preferred the phrase declare over make war. So what do we get out of Mason? Pretty much like Madison. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They want the power of the president to basically run a war, lead a war, to be the commander-in-chief. Folks, if you enjoyed this clip and you want to watch the entire episode, I'm telling you, you're going to love it. You can go to YouTube and subscribe, or go to Rumble and follow. And by the way, tell your friends and family too. I'll see you then.